In a forgotten stretch of Texas highways, where truck stops smell of burnt coffee and diesel, a man named Ray Collins makes a choice that changes his life forever. Ray is not a professional thief, not a con artist, not even a man who ever thought of running from the law. He is a truck driver with 20 years behind the wheel, a failing marriage, medical bills stacked like unpaid promises, and a son who needs more than Ray can give. One night, while hauling a load he didn't ask questions about, Ray discovers something hidden inside the trailer, bundles of cash, tight packed, smelling of ink and fear. $15 million. He doesn't call anyone. He doesn't think twice. He takes it. And in that moment, he crosses a line no man can uncross. But money like that isn't free. The cartel doesn't forgive, and silence has a cost. The story that follows is not about a hero or a villain. It's about a desperate man trying to disappear, the people who loved him being pulled into his lie, and the hunters who will stop at nothing to balance the books. This isn't a Hollywood heist. It's a slow unraveling, a real American tragedy wrapped in dust, greed, and betrayal. Subscribe now if you want to hear the full story. The load that wasn't logged Ray Collins had a way of making himself smaller than he was, shoulders folded, eyes lowered, a habit born from years of parking a 53-foot question in places never meant for it. He carried the look of a man who had made peace with fluorescent lights at 3 a.m., with hash browns that sweated grease through paper, with the hiss of air brakes doubling as lullaby. He kept no souvenirs on the dash, no bobbleheads, no veterans' caps, no saints. Just a worn clipboard with miles, dates, fuel receipts, and a child's drawing folded underneath the logbook like a pressed leaf he could not throw away. The drawing was a stick figure holding hands with a taller stick figure under a lopsided sun, and every time his eyes fell on it, the sun felt more like the fixed red eye of a scalehouse camera. He had been running cheap lanes for weeks, the kind that paid enough to keep a man moving but not enough to keep him whole. Alimony cycled out like tides, medical bills clicked forward in collections, and the boy, Ethan, needed a mouthful of orthodontics and a summer camp deposit Ray kept postponing by ignoring emails until they grew teeth of their own. He told himself that men had done worse things than accept a too-good rate on a mystery load. He told himself that fuel advances paid in cash were still money, even if they were handed in a parking lot by a broker with sunglasses at midnight. He told himself that sealed doors meant he would not be blamed for whatever was inside, that the bill of lading with its vague weight and vague product description was protection enough, that he would roll this thing from a warehouse near Eagle Pass to a distribution ghost up by Odessa and be done. The seal was a cheap plastic strip with numbers laser-etched to look official. The warehouse men had been too polite, the way men are when there is a second room you are not invited to. The forklift beep sounded wrong, either too few pallets for the weight or too many. He had watched them load, counted shrink-wrap layers by habit, noted the new plywood bulkhead braced against the nose of the trailer with self-tapping screws that still shone like teeth. He had never seen a bulkhead added for tile. The bill said ceramic tile. He knew tile. Tile sat on pallets and complained through the suspension. Tile chewed the miles with a steady stone growl. 3 miles after the yard, his cat ticket came back too light for Tile. The number rested in his gut like a swallowed coin. He told himself the scales were off by a hair, told himself the bill of lading had rounded up like all liars do, told himself to keep his eyes on the asphalt and his hours of service clean. The interstate's long black ribbon unspooled under a sky the color of dishwater, and West Texas spread out like a map of promises nobody intended to keep. He rolled past Uvalde, past Del Rio cutoffs, letting the storm-hammered billboards tell him to repent and refinance in equal measure. At Fort Stockton, he took fuel he did not need to buy 15 minutes of fluorescent anonymity. He checked his straps, walked his circle like every safety poster demanded, and his fingers drifted over the plywood again. The screws were not factory. The bit head was wrong. The edges of the sheet were not bruised by forklift kisses the way a bulkhead should have been by now. He thought of Ethan's teeth. He thought of the hospital letter stamped in red. He thought of the woman at dispatch, Jenna, who had sent him 6 late-night loads in the last 2 months and had not asked why he took them all. He had once almost told Jenna about the drawing under the clipboard, about how it felt to drive all day just to be the same man at sundown, but that would have been a kind of begging, and Ray carried shame like other men carried pocket knives. He logged a vehicle inspection the way men log prayers, quick and quiet. He cut the zip tie seal with a pair of side cutters he kept for emergencies that never wrote themselves down. The plastic died without a sound. He slid the doors, let them yawn on their tracks until the stale interior air crept out and told him nothing. The pallets were there, stretch wrap gleaming, corners crisp the way a warehouse manager likes. He stepped in, boots crunching on the grit that lives in every trailer, and put his palms to the plywood. Heat from the day had soaked into it, and his hand came away smelling like cut lumber and something else. Glue, maybe, or ink. He stood in that rectangle of manufactured night and counted to 5 the way he did when the nurse had drawn blood from Ethan and the boy had watched him, waiting for the twitch in his father's jaw. No twitch now. He worked the first screw with the multi-tool bit that sat in his pocket like a key to rooms smarter men never entered. The head stripped, a cheap screw sold by the pound. He worked the second. The plywood shifted the way a door shifts before it decides to confess. Behind the wood there was black plastic pressed into right angles by the brute discipline of vacuum, and the smell was not tile, not stone, not anything with a freight classification. It was ink and polymer and the faint stale sweat of rooms where heat sealers kiss mylar shut all day. He felt his pulse in his teeth. He slid his fingers under the edge and lifted a brick. It weighed more than its size should and less than his life. The plastic flexed just enough to show him color inside. He peeled a corner the way you test a bandage you know you should rip. He saw faces of dead statesmen, the kind who keep appearing on money no matter how much you owe them. Hundreds mostly, some 50s, all crisp in a way that said the hands that stacked them wore gloves. He replaced the brick like a man closing a coffin. He stood very still, the way a deer stands when it realizes the world has more lines of sight than it has eyes. He listened for the laugh of a man outside the trailer, for tires crunching glass, for the click of a phone camera. There was nothing but the far compressor at the truck stop breathing in and out like a sleeping animal. He lowered the plywood into place and stared at the gap. He found the original seal under the bumper where he kept a handful of dead ones for the scale cops who liked to see effort. He wrote the number from memory on the bill with a dull pen because a good liar learns to carry different kinds of truth in the same pocket. He closed the doors and fed the new seal through the holes until it clicked with that soft toy sound that means nothing to anyone but men with ledgers. Then he sat on the bumper and let the sweat run into his collar while the sun burned down through heat haze and diesel shimmer. He had 15 minutes logged for an inspection and 5 minutes left to decide whether he was the sort of man who could put the plywood back and drive like a debt that never sleeps or the sort who could turn his whole life on a hinge made of cheap softwood and borrowed nerve. He thought of the way Ethan had asked, not with words, for the world to make room for him. He thought of Jenna's careful silence whenever a broker paid in cash. He thought of the broker's sunglasses at midnight and the way the man had stood just out of the light when he handed over the fuel money, waiting to see if Ray would flinch at the weight of $100 bills. He had not flinched then. He did not flinch now. He started the engine and let air build until the needles were where they belonged. He did not pull out. He turned back to the trailer, slid the doors again, and this time he did not stop at a single screw. He worked along the line until the plywood eased out like a tooth from a stubborn jaw. He took what a desperate man can take under a sky that punishes hesitation, 3 bricks into the underbunk where his winter bibs lived, 5 into the hollow under the passenger step, 2 into the space behind the fire extinguisher where the plastic cover snaps on without a rattle if you show it respect. He wrapped them in old t-shirts and trash bags because men who drive know that trash can be a kind of camouflage. He reseated the bulkhead and tightened the strip screws to the point that would fool most glances. He cleaned the threads with a spit-darkened rag because he had learned somewhere that details save lives. He closed the doors and fed the seal once more. A new number scrawled lightly into the bill where a smear could be blamed on heat. The math in his head ran like an engine with a misfire. He counted 8 bricks and tried to weigh them into dollars and into years behind bars and into the minutes of relief on his boy's face when a man with latex gloves told him there would be no more blood draws this summer. He knew 8 bricks were nothing against what hid behind that plywood, knew that if he had found money, then money had a reason to be where it was, knew that men who miscounted reasons ended up as roadside crosses. He rolled out of Fort Stockton with a face calm enough to pass a camera. He held the wheel like a man holds a confession. The ELD traced his path with a cold dot that did not care if the trailer behind him carried ceramic tile or a starting gun. He settled into the lane where most men spend most of their lives and told himself that what he had taken was not stealing so much as reclaiming time. He told himself the cartel made money off people who had none and would not miss what he had taken from an ocean so black no light could bruise it. He told himself a story about fairness a child might believe in. By the time the odometer rolled another 100 miles, he had convinced himself of nothing except the size of the shadow that now rode with him. He had seen a gray Tahoe in his side mirror twice, the kind with rental plates and a driver who never passed, only paced. He had seen the Tahoe peel off at a rest area and then return, not hurried, the way a fisherman works a line, not a net. He put his foot down just enough to make the cruise control feel alive, then backed off because speed draws attention and attention was a second currency he did not have to spend. He thought of the rest of the money behind the bulkhead and knew a man who takes 8 bricks can take 80. He also knew that men disappear in fractions, bit by bit, until one day they look in the mirror and see a silhouette with a bill of lading. The highway pushed him north. The sun burned him west. His plan, if you could call it that, formed in pieces as if someone else had already thought it through. A storage unit by the interstate where the manager clocked out at 6, a used bolt seal he could find, at a dock to match a story he would later need. A friend in Midland who owed him a favor and owned a half-dead box truck with peeling vinyl that would not draw a second look at a chain-link fence. He did not write any of this down. He fed miles into the space where men put fear. He watched the mirrors until the Tahoe flickered out of sight. He told himself he had been followed by boredom, by coincidence, by the way guilt makes everything look like surveillance. The night took the heat first, and then the color out of the land. The truck settled into that midnight rhythm where tires sing and diesel murmurs, and a man's worst thoughts step out of the ditch to walk alongside. Ray let them. He did not plead, did not bargain. He drove, and between 1 mile marker and the next, he crossed the line from man who found something to man who took it, and the road ahead shortened in a way only he felt, as if the world itself had become a ledger and every breath a number. Ray did not sleep the next morning. He parked the Freightliner behind a tire shop off a frontage road in Midland, told the shop boy he'd wait for a set of retreads that never arrived, and sat in the cab with the curtains pulled while the heat turned the truck into an oven. The bricks were still there, hidden in spaces he'd designed for spare parts and lies, but the weight of them pressed through every wall. He'd counted them 3 more times in the dark, as if the numbers might change, as if maybe he'd dreamed the whole thing. They hadn't changed. 8 bricks, each wrapped in layers of plastic and silence. 8 bricks that whispered louder than any exhaust brake when the world went quiet. He told himself he'd only hold them until he could think straight. That night, with the truck stop neon burning across his windshield like a wound that refused to close, he had opened one bundle fully. Inside were stacks of hundreds so crisp they snapped when he bent them, so fresh they still smelled of ink. 100 grand in each. 8 bricks. $800,000. Enough to reset a life, not enough to erase the trail behind him. He knew what the rest of the trailer held. Millions more. A number so large it no longer fit into a man's imagination, just into someone else's balance sheet. But he'd taken less than 1/10 of it, as if restraint could be a shield. By dawn, restraint already felt like cowardice. He stared at his reflection in the dead touchscreen of the GPS, a man with the same sun-creased eyes and broken molar, but heavier, older, suddenly unfit for the small, quiet life he had barely managed to hold. He thought about calling Jenna at dispatch. She had a voice that could slide past your defenses without trying, a way of asking, "How's the road?" that sounded like more than small talk. But saying anything to her would be dragging her into a lie she could never climb out of. He left the phone where it was. Instead, he drove to the storage facility. The manager was a pale man with a cheap cologne that smelled of bad citrus and failure. He didn't look up from his paperwork when Ray rented a 10 by 10 unit with cash. He didn't care that Ray parked the semi crooked across 4 spaces to unload. Ray carried the bricks in a backpack like a man hauling gym clothes and locked them in behind a door of corrugated steel that would fold like paper if someone leaned hard enough. But a lock is less about keeping people out and more about letting you breathe while you pretend you're safe. Back in the truck, the phone lit up. Not Jenna. Not his son. A number he didn't know. He didn't answer. The voicemail never came. But later, when he fueled in Odessa, he saw the Tahoe again. The same gray, the same untinted windows, parked 3 lanes down, the driver's face invisible behind the shine of the windshield. He walked inside to pay cash, even though his card worked, and when he came back out the Tahoe was gone. He told himself it was nothing. He told himself everything now looked like a Tahoe. He told himself liars see patterns where truth is scattered. That evening he called Ethan. His son's voice came through the crackling line like it had traveled through deserts and storms. Ethan talked about baseball tryouts, about a friend whose dad bought him a new glove, about braces that hurt when he chewed. Ray lied and said the money for the braces was on its way, that things were looking up. Ethan said good in the flat way kids say it when they don't believe but want to. Ray swallowed the weight in his throat and told himself the lie was a gift. When he hung up, the silence in the cab was louder than the highway. He turned the key, rolled out under the half-dead lights of the truck stop, and pointed the rig north. He had miles to burn, a delivery he could no longer deliver, and a shadow lengthening behind him. Because the thing about stealing from men like this, the cartel doesn't write off losses. They don't call insurance. They balance ledgers in blood. Somewhere, even now, someone was counting, someone was realizing numbers didn't match, someone was starting a hunt. And Ray Collins, truck driver, man of no importance, had just written his name in their books with the ink of his own desperation. The highway felt narrower than it ever had, the white lines bending into walls. He adjusted his mirrors, but the road behind him no longer mattered. What mattered was how long a man could outrun his own shadow and whether, when the ledger finally closed, there'd be anything left of him to pay. South of Laredo, in a warehouse that smelled of bleach and diesel, a man in a white shirt tucked too neatly into pressed jeans went over the manifests with a ballpoint pen. His name wasn't written anywhere, but men whispered it, Marquez. He wasn't the kind who carried a gun on his hip. He carried silence in a way that made others draw their own guns for him. His work wasn't violence, it was subtraction. If the books didn't balance, someone disappeared, and in the math of his world, the missing always equaled 0. That morning, the numbers didn't add up. A shipment that should have been $15 million in cash arrived short. Not by a handful, by bricks. 8 bricks, maybe more, gone before the pallets were unwrapped. The bulkhead was in place, the seal intact, the paperwork clean. But Marquez's men waited, counted it, stripped it bare, and the ledger glared red. The driver's name appeared on the manifest, Collins Raymond. American. Midland address. No priors. A nobody. Marquez knew nobodies better than anyone. Nobodies were dangerous because they didn't calculate the way professionals did. They stumbled into things, and their panic made them unpredictable. He circled the name once, pressed the pen down until it bled through. Then he folded the paper and slid it into his pocket. He didn't raise his voice, didn't call a meeting. He just nodded to a man in the corner, a watcher who had followed trucks before, and said one word, find. Back in Midland, Ray felt it in the air before he saw it. He stopped at a diner off I-20, the kind with cracked vinyl booths and coffee that tasted like burned patience. He took his usual seat by the window and ordered eggs he wouldn't eat. Outside, the Tahoe idled 3 spaces down, its engine humming steady. Ray stared at his plate, forcing his hands not to shake. He knew then this wasn't paranoia. Someone was there watching. Someone who already suspected. He tried to breathe like a man with nothing to hide, but the eggs congealed in front of him and the waitress refilled his cup without asking. When he stepped back outside, the Tahoe was gone. He checked the storage unit twice that day, making sure the lock was still in place, running his hand over the corrugated steel like he could feel betrayal through metal. He thought about moving the bricks again, splitting them into smaller hides, but every shift meant exposure, and exposure meant a clock ticking louder. That night, Jenna called. Not about the load, not about paperwork. Just to check in, her voice softer than usual. She said dispatch had heard rumors, whispers about federal eyes on the border runs, brokers dropping out, lanes drying up. She asked if he was okay. Ray said yes, but too fast. She paused, and in that pause Ray heard every unspoken question. Why are you taking so many night loads? Why do you sound like a man hiding in his own cab? Why does your silence feel heavier than your words? He promised he'd swing by her office next week, maybe grab coffee. He didn't mean it, but the lie came easy now. Miles away, in the desert dark, Marquez's Tahoe wasn't alone anymore. A second vehicle joined, an F-250 with blacked-out plates. They weren't in a rush. Men like Marquez never were. They moved methodically, tightening circles, waiting for a mistake. And mistakes were inevitable. A trucker can't vanish. He leaves logs, fuel receipts, weigh tickets, witnesses at every stop. Ray thought he'd left no trace, but the truth was every mile marker was a breadcrumb. That night, parked at a rest area with his curtains drawn, Ray heard footsteps outside the cab. Not the shuffle of another driver, not the laugh of kids stretching their legs, but slow, deliberate steps along the gravel. He held his breath, counted heartbeats. A knuckle rapped once against the trailer door. Then silence. The steps retreated, and when Ray dared peek through the curtain, the Tahoe was parked under the sodium light, the driver's silhouette faint but patient, a shape that wasn't leaving. Ray sat in the dark until the sky paled, every nerve screaming. He thought of the money, thought of Ethan, thought of Jenna, and for the first time wondered not if he could get away, but how much blood the getting away would cost. Because the cartel's ledger had already marked him, and men like Marquez didn't erase numbers. They collected. Ray learned early that the road teaches you two kinds of patience, the kind where you wait for traffic to clear, and the kind where you wait for something worse to happen. By the time he pulled into Midland again, he knew which kind this was. He couldn't shake the feeling that every gas station clerk stared too long, that every state trooper who slowed near him already knew, that every Tahoe in his mirrors was the same one multiplying itself across the state. At the yard, he dropped his trailer and found Jenna waiting by the dispatch window. She didn't smile. She just slid a manila envelope across the counter, new load, paperwork too clean, addresses too vague. He didn't touch it. She said, "Ray, I don't know what you're mixed up in, but people have been asking." Her voice cracked a little, not from fear, but from something heavier, like disappointment. He tried to brush it off with a joke, said she was giving him ghost stories. But when she leaned forward, her eyes were hard. "They don't ask twice, Ray. Not these people." He stuffed the envelope into his jacket without looking. That night, back in his cab, he counted the bricks in the storage unit again. 8, untouched. Each one staring at him like a witness he couldn't silence. He thought about moving them further, Nevada maybe, some forgotten storage shed under a fake name, but every mile between him and the money was a mile he couldn't control. He started to understand that possession wasn't power. Possession was a chain. The first call came at midnight. A voice with no accent, flat and careful. "Mr. Collins, we know what you took. We know where you live. We don't want to hurt your boy. Bring it back." Then the line clicked dead. No threats, no shouting, just fact. Ray sat frozen, phone sweating in his hand, until the diesel rumble of a truck passing on the interstate broke the silence. He didn't sleep. By dawn, his thoughts turned to Ethan. He hadn't told his ex-wife anything, hadn't warned her, because warning her would mean admitting what he'd done. But the idea of cartel eyes on a kid's baseball field made bile rise in his throat. He dialed her number twice, hung up both times. What could he say? That he'd gambled with their son's life over 800 grand? That he had chained them all to his desperation? He drove instead, pushing the rig into endless miles, as if forward motion itself could erase the math. But the circle was already closing. At a truck stop outside Abilene, a man slid into his booth uninvited. Ordinary man, work boots, ball cap, hands rough from labor. But the eyes were wrong, calm, cold, already measuring him. The man set a folded slip of paper on the table and pushed it across. No words, no threats. Just a name and an address scrawled in blue ink. Ethan Collins. Ray's stomach dropped so fast he thought he'd pass out. When he looked up, the man was gone, already stepping out the door like he'd never been there. Ray drove all night after that, not chasing a destination, but running from the weight of that slip of paper. He tossed it out the window somewhere past Wichita Falls, but the name stayed etched in his mind. He started talking to himself in the cab, muttering plans that dissolved before they finished forming. He rehearsed calls to Jenna, to his ex-wife, to anyone who might anchor him, but all the words curdled before they left his throat. By morning, his face in the mirror looked hollowed, his eyes bloodshot, his hands twitching on the wheel. He realized then that this wasn't about the 8 bricks anymore. It wasn't even about the 15 million left behind. It was about ownership. The cartel had marked him as theirs, and no matter how far he drove, the Ledger rode shotgun. That day, he made a choice. He pulled into a bank in a town too small to remember, took 1 brick from his hiding place, stripped the plastic, and walked inside. The teller smiled politely until she saw the stack of hundreds. Her eyes flicked up, nervous. He said he wanted a safe deposit box. He said it like a man renting a coffin. She led him to the back, handed him the key. He slid the money inside and shut the lid. For the first time since Eagle Pass, he breathed. But as he walked back to the truck, he saw the Tahoe again, parked across the street, engine idling, windows dark. And he understood, it didn't matter where he stashed the money, how carefully he played the game. They were always a step behind, patient, methodical, closing in one quiet circle at a time. Ray climbed into the cab, gripped the wheel until his knuckles whitened, and realized something had shifted. He wasn't just running anymore. He was preparing for a fight. Ray's world shrank to the sound of tires on asphalt and the echo of his own pulse. Every mile marker he passed felt less like progress and more like a countdown. The slip of paper with Ethan's name was gone, but the message carved itself deeper each day. The boy was leverage, and Ray had written the script that put him on stage. 3 days later, the bank called. The manager's voice was clipped, professional, but there was a tremor underneath. The safe deposit box had been accessed. Not by Ray. Someone else. The brick was gone. Ray didn't bother arguing. He hung up, and the truth settled cold in his stomach. They already knew every move. His hiding places were jokes. His secrecy was theater for an audience that had memorized the ending. That night he sat in the dark cab and finally called Jenna. He didn't mean to, but his fingers dialed the number before he could stop them. When she answered, her voice was hushed, like she was already bracing for bad news. He told her everything. Not details, not names, but enough. Money in the trailer, cartel ties, being followed. He expected her to hang up, to curse him, to tell him never to call again. Instead, she whispered, "Ray, you're in deeper than you think. You can't carry this alone." He felt shame bleed through his skin, but also a sliver of something like relief. For the first time, someone else knew. The next day, his ex-wife called out of nowhere. She said a man had been at her door, polite, asking if Ethan was home. She thought maybe it was one of Ray's trucking buddies, someone lost. Ray said nothing, just clenched the phone until it almost snapped. When she asked if she should call the police, his voice cracked for the first time in years. "No, don't call anyone. Take Ethan. Stay at your sister's." Now, he hung up before she could argue. By then the paranoia had eaten into his bones. Every rest area felt like a trap, every way station like an ambush. He stopped using his card, paid cash for fuel, stopped logging hours. But the Tahoe kept returning, always just close enough to be seen, never close enough to confront. It wasn't pursuit. It was pressure. Finally, in a diner outside Amarillo, a man slid into the booth across from him. Not the same as before. This one was older, with gray at his temples, calm eyes that looked like they'd seen too many men break. He didn't threaten. He didn't raise his voice. He simply said, 15 million. That was ours. You want to live? You bring it back. Tonight, Ray asked what would happen if he didn't. The man stirred his coffee and said, "Then the boy carries your debt." No shouting, just fact. Then he slid out of the booth and was gone before the waitress brought the check. Ray sat there long after the coffee went cold. His choice was clear now, cut clean down the middle. Give back the money and hope the cartel kept their word. Or vanish completely, take Ethan, take Jenna if she'd follow, and disappear into the cracks of America where names dissolve and cash is king. Either way, someone would bleed. By the time he got back to his cab, he knew what he was going to do. The money had never been salvation. It was a curse wrapped in plastic, a noose disguised as escape. But surrender didn't feel like survival either. What Ray wanted wasn't forgiveness or mercy. What he wanted was leverage. He stared at the road stretching into the dark, fingers tightening on the wheel, and thought, if the cartel wanted their money back, he'd make sure they paid for it in ways they didn't count in ledgers. And somewhere deep inside, a man who had spent 20 years hauling freight finally stopped being cargo. Ray drove until the sky thinned from black to bruised purple, the highway stretching flat as a sheet of paper waiting for an obituary. The Tahoe was behind him again, steady, unhurried, a shadow that didn't need to hide anymore. He wasn't running now, he was steering toward the end. He pulled off near Tucumcari, into a forgotten truck stop where the pumps leaned tired and the lights buzzed like dying insects. He killed the engine and sat still, feeling the hum in his bones fade. Then he reached under the bunk, pulled the remaining bricks into a duffel, and zipped it slow, like he was sealing himself inside. 800 grand. He knew it wasn't the full 15 million, knew the cartel didn't care about fractions. But fractions were all he had left. When the Tahoe rolled in, he wasn't surprised. Two men stepped out. Not Marquez, his kind never dirted their boots, but soldiers, faces blank, hands easy at their sides. One opened the back door. Inside sat the older man from Amarillo, gray at the temples, eyes calm and cruel. He didn't waste words. "You're late." Ray set the duffel on the asphalt. "This is what I've got." The man leaned forward, looked at him for a long beat, then nodded once. Not enough. His voice wasn't angry, just final. He gestured, and one of the soldiers stepped closer. Ray raised his hand. "Wait. You want the rest? You'll get it. But not from me. From your own books. You've got holes you don't even see." He said it like he believed it, though every nerve in his body screamed. He wasn't bluffing about the holes. He'd heard whispers at truck stops, about loads going light, about schemes from the inside. He was betting his life that greed had already been bleeding them before he ever touched that plywood. The older man's eyes narrowed. Silence stretched, broken only by the hiss of cooling metal under Ray's hood. Finally, the man leaned back. "Maybe?" He flicked his hand. The soldier froze, but ledger's still open. He nodded toward Ray. "You owe. You don't get clean." Ray swallowed hard. "I'm not clean, but I'm not running either. You want your debt collected, you come for me. Not for my boy." For the first time, the man smiled. Small, thin, but real. "You think you get to choose how this ends?" He gestured, and the Tahoe door shut with a hollow thud. The truck rolled out, taillights bleeding into the desert night, leaving the duffel at Ray's feet. They hadn't taken it. A message sharper than any blade. The money meant less than the leash. Ray stood there a long time, watching the dust settle. Then he picked up the bag, walked back to his cab, and set it down beside him like an anchor. He knew now he'd never be free. The cartel didn't forgive. They didn't forget. His name was inked in their ledger until the day he stopped breathing. But he also knew something else. They'd looked him in the eye and walked away. Not mercy. Calculation. They wanted him alive, wanted to see what a desperate man would do, maybe even use him, maybe even let him dig holes for them until the dirt caved in. He turned the key, felt the engine rumble awake, and stared at the endless dark ribbon of I-40. Somewhere out there, Ethan was sleeping safe at his aunt's. Jenna was back in Midland, still waiting for answers he couldn't give. And Ray Collins, truck driver, thief by accident, liar by necessity, was still behind the wheel, still breathing, still moving. He knew this wasn't victory. It wasn't escape. It was something uglier, something quieter, survival. The kind that costs more each day until you forget what you started paying for. As the rig rolled forward, Ray reached under the dash, pulled out Ethan's drawing, and set it on the wheel. The stick figure still smiled under the crooked sun. He pressed it flat with his palm and whispered to no one, "I'll buy you time, kid. That's all I can give." The road swallowed him, taillights fading into black, a man not free but not yet broken, a ghost moving freight across America's veins, with the cartel's debt riding shotgun forever. And that's how the story ends, not with triumph, not with redemption, but with a truth most men never say out loud. Sometimes the best you get is one more mile. If this story pulled you in, if you felt the weight of Ray's choice, hit like and subscribe. There are more roads, more stories, and more shadows waiting just beyond the headlights.